Few outside the Vatican knew that Pope Francis, leader of over 1 billion Catholics around the world, had a soft spot not just for people, but for animals, especially one particular golden Labrador named Matteo. The dog was never seen during public events or official meetings. In fact, his existence remained completely private for years. But inside the vast halls of the Vatican, beyond the echo of marble floors and the rustle of ceremonial robes, Matteo was more than just a pet. He was a companion, a source of comfort, and a quiet presence in the Pope's personal life. Matteo came into Pope Francis' life during the early months of his papacy. He had been gifted to him by a humble Argentinian shelter, the same region where the Pope had once walked the streets as George Mario Bergoglio. The shelter sent a letter explaining that the dog had been abandoned, but showed great gentleness and intelligence. The Pope read it slowly, smiled, and agreed to welcome Matteo without hesitation. At first, the transition was strange for Matteo. The quiet dog, once used to dusty corners and cold concrete, now found himself in the heart of the Catholic Church. But it didn't take long for the two souls to connect. Pope Francis, often surrounded by advisors, cameras, and the constant weight of responsibility, found rare peace in Matteo's silent presence. The dog asked for nothing. No titles, no attention. Just time, space, and the company of the man who gave him his name. Though many assumed the Pope spent his private hours in solitude or prayer, those close to him knew better. Matteo would often be found lying quietly beside the Pope's chair during morning readings or napping near the open window while birds chirped in the garden. Sometimes the Pope would pause mid-sentence to gently scratch Matteo behind the ears, smiling like a grandfather with an old friend. The Vatican staff grew fond of Matteo, but they also respected the boundary the Pope had quietly placed around him. This was not a dog for parades or photo ops. This was a friend, and their relationship was not meant to be on display. In a world where every gesture of the Pope was seen, analyzed, and shared, Matteo was his one secret, and perhaps that was what made their bond so pure. In a palace filled with tradition and grandeur, a simple dog reminded the world's most powerful pastor of the sacredness of humility, loyalty, and quiet love. Each morning before sunrise, when the city of Rome still slept beneath a pale sky, Pope Francis would quietly rise and make his way through the stone corridors of the Vatican. While others prepared for a day of formalities and addresses, he looked forward to something far simpler, a morning walk with Matteo. The Vatican gardens, often admired from a distance, became a sanctuary not just for the Pope, but for his four-legged companion. Surrounded by olive trees, rose bushes, and fountains built centuries ago, Pope Francis found something more profound than architecture: stillness. In those hushed hours, when the dew clung to leaves and the world had not yet stirred, he and Matteo would walk side by side in perfect rhythm. Sometimes Pope Francis spoke aloud, not in formal prayer, but in soft conversations meant only for Matteo and perhaps, in his heart, for God. He would share thoughts, hopes, and the burdens of a world that often seemed too heavy. Matteo, as always, responded with calm eyes and a steady pace. He never interrupted, never judged, never strayed. In his silence, he gave something most people couldn't: full presence. These walks were sacred in their own way. No guards followed, no photographers intruded. It was a time when the Pope was simply a man and Matteo was simply a friend. Often, they would stop at a small bench near a lemon tree. There, Pope Francis would sit and Matteo would rest his head on his foot or lean gently against his leg, as if to remind him that he was never alone. Vatican aides knew not to disturb this hour. It was understood that no meeting, no visitor, and no decision could interrupt what the Pope called our morning peace. Even on days when international crises loomed or global events demanded his voice, he would begin with Matteo by his side. It was his grounding, his quiet ritual before stepping into a world of responsibility. Over time, this daily habit became more than a routine. It became a relationship. Pope Francis once confided to a close friend, "He listens better than most people." Maybe that's why he understands more than he should. In a life where every moment was watched, recorded, and analyzed, the Pope's walks with Matteo remained untouched. They were moments where time paused, where words mattered less than presence, and where a man could find peace not in grand sermons, but in the gentle steps of a faithful friend walking beside him. For years, Matteo remained the Vatican's quiet secret. While the world saw Pope Francis as the humble, outspoken leader of the Catholic Church, few imagined that behind the scenes, a golden Labrador shared his most peaceful hours. That changed with a single, unexpected moment, a photograph that captured hearts across the globe. It happened on a bright spring afternoon. A visiting bishop from Latin America, unaware of the Pope's deep desire for privacy, wandered through the Vatican gardens after a meeting. He came upon a touching scene. Pope Francis kneeling in the grass, gently tying a blue ribbon around Matteo's neck. The dog sat patiently, his tail wagging slowly, while the Pope spoke to him in soft Spanish, smiling as he worked. There was no ceremony, no grand gesture, just a quiet celebration of the dog's birthday. The bishop, moved by the sight, snapped a photo without thinking and later shared it on his personal social media account. The image was simple. The Pope, a man revered by millions, completely focused on a dog, his hand resting gently on Matteo's head. Within hours, the photo had gone viral. It was shared by journalists, animal lovers, and spiritual leaders alike. People from every corner of the world commented on the tenderness in the Pope's posture and the trust in Matteo's eyes. News headlines called it the most human moment of the year. Others simply captioned it, love in its purest form. For once, the story wasn't about politics, doctrine, or world affairs. It was about connection, about the small acts of love that bind us all. Many were surprised that the Pope, a man of such spiritual authority, had kept this bond hidden for so long. But those close to him weren't shocked at all. They knew how carefully he protected his relationship with Matteo. It was never meant to be a symbol or a media moment. It was just real. When Vatican officials realized the photo had gone public, there was a brief discussion about removing it. But Pope Francis gently declined. "Let them see what love looks like," he said with a quiet smile. From that day on, the world saw Matteo not just as a dog, but as a reminder of kindness, humility, and the silent language of trust. And though the photo had been unplanned, it became one of the most beloved images ever captured of the Pope, not in grandeur, but in grace. As the seasons changed and the years quietly passed, Matteo began to slow down. It was subtle at first, shorter walks in the morning, longer naps in the afternoon, and hesitation in his steps when the garden path curved uphill. Pope Francis noticed every shift. The dog who once ran eagerly toward the lemon tree now preferred to rest beneath it, eyes half closed, tail gently thumping with each passing breeze. The Pope, though surrounded by advisors and caretakers, needed no explanation. He had seen aging before, in parishioners, in family members, even in himself. But witnessing it in Matteo felt different. It was a soft ache, a kind of sadness that came not from sudden tragedy, but from the gentle realization that time was quietly calling his friend home. Vatican veterinarians were kind but honest. Matteo was nearing the end of his life. His heart was slower, his breathing sometimes strained, and his joints, once strong and playful, now stiffened with every step. There were no emergencies, no flashing signs, just the quiet truth of nature taking its course. Pope Francis responded not with despair, but with compassion. He adjusted his schedule to spend more time with Matteo. Their walks became strolls, then slow meanders, and eventually quiet sits under the olive trees. On some days, Matteo would simply lie beside him, head resting on the Pope's sandal, while Francis read scripture or watched the birds overhead. Words were rarely needed. In their shared silence, everything important was said. At night, the Pope would check on Matteo personally, often kneeling beside his bed to whisper a soft prayer or offer a gentle stroke behind the ears. Some nights he would sit for hours, watching over him like a father beside a sleeping child. He once told a close aide, "He has been with me every day. I will be with him every night." Though the Vatican remained a place of ceremonies, speeches, and sacred duties, there was a shift in tone among those who knew what was happening. They moved a little more quietly, spoke with softer voices, and offered the Pope extra space without needing to ask why. It was clear to everyone, Matteo's time was drawing near. But what was equally clear was the depth of love that surrounded him. In the heart of the Vatican, where history and faith shaped every corner, a man and his dog faced goodbye not with fear, but with dignity, gratitude, and unspoken devotion. It was a clear and quiet morning when the end finally came. The air in the Vatican gardens was cool, touched with the scent of blooming jasmine and the soft rustle of leaves swaying gently in the breeze. Pope Francis rose earlier than usual, sensing in his heart that this morning would be different. Matteo had not moved much the night before, his breaths shallow, his eyes tired but peaceful. Instead of summoning aides or speaking to doctors, the Pope lifted Matteo in his arms and carried him through the familiar halls, past ancient stone archways and flower-filled courtyards. They reached the garden bench beneath their favorite olive tree, the same spot where countless mornings had begun. This time, the Pope sat quietly with Matteo resting across his lap, his head against the folds of the white papal robe. Birds sang softly above them, as if offering a gentle chorus of comfort. Pope Francis stroked Matteo's fur slowly, whispering prayers not from obligation, but from love. "You have walked with me through years of joy, worry, and hope," he said gently. "And now I will walk you home." There were no final words, no dramatic farewells. Just a deep stillness between two souls who had shared a journey few others could understand. As the sun broke through the clouds and cast a soft golden light over the garden, Matteo let out a slow final breath. His body grew still in the Pope's arms, his face calm, his eyes closed as if simply falling into sleep. Pope Francis remained there, unmoving, for a long time. No guards approached. No photographers intruded. It was a sacred moment, beyond duty, beyond position. The shepherd of the church had lost a friend, not in a palace, not before a crowd, but in the most human of ways, beneath a tree, in silence, with his heart full of both sorrow and gratitude. Later that morning, a small wooden box was prepared. The Pope, despite the protests of security staff, insisted on helping carry it himself. Matteo was laid to rest in a quiet corner of the Vatican gardens, beneath the very tree where he had spent so many peaceful mornings. No grand ceremony followed, no headlines were issued, but for Pope Francis, that tree became a sacred place, a place of memory, of love, and of goodbye. And in that quiet farewell, witnessed only by the wind and the leaves, a chapter closed with grace. The following Sunday, St. Peter's Square overflowed with thousands of pilgrims, visitors, and faithful from every corner of the world. As always, Pope Francis stepped out onto the balcony for his weekly address, his white robe catching the breeze as the bells of St. Peter's Basilica echoed through the air. But this time, there was a different weight to his presence, a stillness in his expression that many noticed the moment he began to speak. His usual greetings were brief. Then, with a quiet breath, he set aside his written notes and looked out over the crowd. Today, he began, "I would like to speak not only as the Pope, but as a man who has recently said goodbye to a friend." There was a hush in the square. Even the birds circling above seemed to quiet as he continued. "For many years, I was blessed with the company of a good and loyal companion named Matteo," he said. "He did not speak, but he listened. He did not judge, but he stayed. He taught me things without ever saying a word." The Pope paused for a moment, visibly moved. There is a silence that some animals bring into our lives, a silence that heals, comforts, and teaches. Matteo brought that silence to me every day. In his presence, I found peace. Many in the crowd did not know who Matteo was until now, but as the Pope shared memories of quiet mornings, shared walks, and gentle companionship, tears began to fill eyes across the square. It was not simply a story about a dog. It was a message about love, loyalty, and the quiet ways God speaks. Sometimes, the Pope said, his voice soft but steady, God sends angels to walk with us. Not all of them have wings. Some have fur and gentle eyes, and a heart full of trust. Applause did not follow immediately. Instead, there was a long, respectful silence. Then, slowly, the crowd responded, not with loud cheers, but with heartfelt clapping, nods, and soft smiles. In homes across the world where the address was being watched live, people felt the weight of his words. Some held their pets a little closer that day. Others remembered those they had lost. Pope Francis ended his message with a simple blessing. To all creatures great and small, may we learn to love as they do, freely, completely, and without fear. And with that, the tribute was complete. The world did not forget Matteo. After Pope Francis spoke about him so openly and lovingly during his Sunday address, a wave of compassion began to ripple far beyond the Vatican walls. Letters, drawings, and messages poured in from across the globe. Children wrote poems about friendship. Elderly people shared stories of their own beloved pets. And shelters reported a surprising rise in adoptions. People felt inspired to act, moved by a simple truth the Pope had reminded them of, that love, especially the quiet kind, matters deeply. In the days that followed, Pope Francis met with members of the Pontifical Council and shared a vision. He wanted to honor Matteo not just with words, but with action. His life reminded me of how many are forgotten, the Pope said. Not just animals, but those who live quietly on the edges of our care. From this heartfelt conviction, a new initiative was born, Matteo's Light. The project began as a Vatican-funded support network for local animal shelters throughout Italy, but quickly expanded. Donations from across the world helped launch new programs for stray animal care, education on responsible pet ownership, and even therapy dog training in hospitals and orphanages. A special fund was created to provide grants to struggling shelters, especially in low-income regions. Matteo's Light wasn't just about animals, though. It grew to become a symbol of gentle service, inspiring volunteer programs that paired the elderly with young people to walk dogs together or care for rescue animals. The Pope's message about Matteo reminded people that compassion could be lived out in small ways, through companionship, attention, and presence. A logo was designed, a soft silhouette of a dog curled beside a cross, and soon began appearing on volunteer jackets, shelter signs, and community banners. It wasn't meant to be grand. It was meant to be a reminder that even the quietest lives can leave behind the brightest legacy. When asked why he chose the name Matteo's Light, Pope Francis explained it simply. Because he brought light to my life, and I believe that light can spread to shelters, to homes, to hearts that need comfort. And it did. From Buenos Aires to Manila, from Rome to Cape Town, people shared how they were moved to adopt, to foster, to care, or simply to pause in their busy lives and love a little more. Matteo had never spoken a word, but now, through others, his message was loud and clear. Time moved on, as it always does, but Matteo's presence never truly left Pope Francis. Though the daily walks in the garden were quieter now, and the bench beneath the olive tree often sat in stillness, the Pope carried his friend's memory with him like a gentle weight on his heart. Grief, he had once said, is not a burden. It is the proof that love once lived. In moments between meetings, Pope Francis would sometimes pause near the tree where Matteo was laid to rest. He would sit for a few minutes, say a silent prayer, or simply close his eyes and remember. Not the sorrow of goodbye, but the joy of having shared so many days with a soul who had asked for nothing but time and love. Visitors to the Vatican gardens began to notice the small plaque beneath the olive tree, simple, unadorned, with just a name and a line that read, "For the one who listened." It became a quiet pilgrimage site, not for those seeking miracles or visions, but for those who understood the beauty of silent companionship. People would leave flowers, small dog collars, even handwritten notes, thanking the Pope for sharing his story and honoring a creature who had touched the world. Within the Vatican, a new culture of gentleness began to grow. Priests and staff spoke more openly about the emotional lives of animals and the quiet ways they support the human spirit. Some began visiting local shelters on their days off, volunteering to walk dogs or care for animals waiting for a home. Matteo, though gone in body, had quietly sparked a movement of compassion that continued to unfold. As for Pope Francis, he continued his work with strength and humility. But those closest to him noticed the subtle changes, the softer tone in his reflections, the increased time spent with people who had known loss, the quiet way he would bend down to greet animals brought by visitors. In his heart, Matteo walked beside him still. One afternoon, during a visit with a group of children, a young girl asked the Pope if he ever missed his dog. He smiled gently, knelt to her level, and said, "Every day. But love does not end. It becomes part of you." And so the world continued to turn, the church carried on, and the olive tree swayed in the Roman breeze. But beneath its branches and in the heart of one of the most powerful men on earth, the memory of a quiet dog named Matteo lived on, in silence, in peace, and in love.